Shalom. Let me get straight into this lesson. I wanted to go ahead and do this lesson because I've been meaning to do it. Just to go inside of the mind of a typical Edomite. And this is how they feel. They got that perpetual hatred towards you so-called blacks, Hispanic, and Native Americans. And this guy was a poster child for that hatred. You know what I'm saying? You know, and this is the hypocritical nature of the so-called white man. He'll do things, but when somebody else do what he do, he'll call them the T word. He'll call them all kind of names. He'll say they unpatriotic, so on and so forth. And they go to show you the nasty nature of this devil. So I'm gonna get into this video right here, and this is diabolical, man. You know, let me get into this video. Give me 1 second.
Country, did they do so through the legal process? My grandpa entered in illegally. Okay, we must be very...
Now, this conversation is talking about so-called immigration, and they go to show you, I'm going to get into this devil, dark, murky, demonic history that they don't like to talk about. They want to say it's the past, but the past affects the present. That's why things are the way they are, because of the past today.
Very clear, the type of immigration that we support is when you follow our rules and you come on our terms. Do you think that you have a right to immigrate to America? My grandparents made that decision for me. I'm not trying to attack your grandparents, but no one has a right to go to anybody else's country. It is a privilege.
You hear that? You hear that? You hear this devil? So this is so hypocritical, because I'm going to get into this devil. Did they not steal this whole land from the so-called Native Americans? Play this back again. Play it back a little bit. Check this out.
Process. My grandpa entered in illegally. Okay, we must be very clear. The type of immigration that we support is when you follow our rules and you come on our terms. Do you think...
Follow our rules and come on our terms. That's that so-called white supremacy, right? And a white is a social construct for what that term means. White associated with something positive. Black is associated with something negative. That's why they call you black and they call themselves white. Let's get more into this.
That you have a right to immigrate to America? My grandparents made that decision for me. I'm not trying to attack your grandparents, but no one has a right to go to anybody else's country. It is a...
You hear this? So this devil don't follow his own verbiage, you know what I'm saying? And they go to show you that this is the, you know what I'm saying, the devil in the flesh, you know. Let's keep going.
Privilege, not a right to come into America. So it's a privilege to live a life that requires you to have clean water, clean food, clean air. Yes, of course it is. And you have to fight for that? Yes, it is not. But we didn't. Hold on a sec. Well, born here, we didn't fight for that? Well, my ancestors did fight for that, actually, and I'm a very thankful recipient of many generations of Americans that fought for the greatest nation ever to exist. By doing what? Coming here? They came over here in 1620, fought in the Revolutionary War, fought in the Civil War, fought in World War I. So because my grandpa didn't come here in 1620, it gives him no right to have a good life? He can fill out paperwork and wait in line.
See this? See that devil? This is, and you see how he skipped over all that? He conveniently jumped over the history of them slaughtering the Native Americans, but I'm gonna get into it. He talking about the Civil War and all that. No, you stole this land. Your ancestors stole this land. They raped, robbed, split people, families up. You know what I'm saying? Put people on reservations. Look what they did to the so-called blacks. They put us in hardcore chattel slavery. This devil didn't talk about none of that history, because they want to do it the way they want to do it. They want to tell you that this is the greatest kingdom. No, this is the worst kingdom in the world. And a lot of these Edomites will say, go back to Africa. They'll tell Jake that. You go back to fucking Mount Seir, devil. Let's get into this. Now, this is what the game they play, right? But the spirit on us to call this shit out. It says, number one, historical amnesia. That's what you saw. Because he jumped over all the other history. So they be selective in the history they want to talk about. When it's the history that's so-called good and make them look good, that's the history they'll bring out. But that negative history, they don't want to talk about that because they want to control the narrative. That's he was doing in that back and forth. And it says, and narrative control. Okay, let's get into this. It says societies often rewrite or sanitize their history. That's what he did there. And to portray themselves as rightful or moral actors. It says European, which they true ethnicity or Edomites. European is New Speak. It says, I'm just going to read it. We're supposed to say Edomites, so-called white people, settlers in the Americas, over generation framed themselves as founders. You see how they use that word? Rather than invaders. They the real immigrants, you know what I'm saying? And indigenous peoples were often depicted as obstacles or savages. That's in all their history books. They categorized the so-called Native Americans, which were Israelites, as savages. This creates a cultural memory gap where descendants see themselves as native to the land, forgetting the violent conquest that occurred. He didn't want to talk about that. And this is how all these Edomites think the same way. It says power and legitimacy. It says once a group gains control over a territory, it tends to redefine the moral and legal standards for who belongs there. That's what he just did. He's got to make the decision who belongs. That's that so-called white supremacy coming out these devils. It says, that's why they'll say, this is my country. No, this is not your country. You stole this country. So you're a liar. Your country is in Mount Seir. Being a dominant group gives the ability to label newcomers as outsiders or invaders or immigrants, right? Even if the dominant group's own ancestors did the same thing. And that's the hypocrisy that these devils do. That's why when they go back, they'll just go back to Africa. They'll tell Jake that. No, you devils go back to Mount Seir. You're not from here either. You know what I'm saying? And this is our original land for the so-called Native Americans. It says this is a power dynamic. Those in power set the rules and the language. That's the so-called white man, so God complex that he has. It says psychological mechanisms. It says cognitive dissonance. It's uncomfortable to see your ancestors as aggressors. People resolve this by rationalizing that we were different, or we bought civilization, which justifies the past while condemning similar actions in others. That's why they'll go around the earth playing police, trying to tell people what they can and can't do. Yet they do the same thing, and they've done atrocities. This is the worst place you could be in right now, Babylon. That's why we need deliverance, and this place is going to be overthrown. It says in group bias, humans naturally favor their own group and see outsiders as threats, even if historically they were the outsiders. Selective memory. That's what you saw this devil play that game. It says historical violence is minimized or omitted in education, literature, and media, and reinforcing a skewed worldview. That's why the people are all messed up and confused, don't know what's going on, because they're under this heavy demonic spell of Christianity through the perspective of the so-called white man. It says cultural reinforcement, and that's this cultural assimilation you jakes have learned because you don't know better. And I'm talking about the people that's outside of truth. It says national myths, holidays, which you do all your holidays. You know, if you just waking up, you know, you got to stop doing all that. And stories, Thanksgiving, which is Thanksgiving Day, the founding of America, glorified settlers, and erase indigenous perspectives. This shapes collective identity, teaching people from a young age that their presence is natural or just, while newcomers are framed as disruptive. It says modern manifestations. Today, the hypocrisy shows up in debates. That's what you just saw about immigration. That's what that debate was about. Borders and land use. Descendants of colonizers, so-called white people, Edomites, often demand strict control over who enters their land. That's why he had that lofty stance, as he's the one that he's the judge, jury, and the executioner, while historically ignoring the violent displacement of the original inhabitants. They don't want to talk about that. This perpetuates cycles of exclusion and moral contradiction. That's why this devilish what so-called white people do. It says bottom line, It's not just hypocrisy. It's a socially and psychologically and reinforced system designed to justify power and maintain a sense of moral legitimacy. Awareness of this pattern is the first step towards understanding modern social conflicts, inequality, and social tensions, racial tensions, Salakia. But you saw, let's get into some scriptures. Give me 1 second. It's the same thing that you Christians and Christ is king, but who is they talking about? They talking about this so-called white dude. Zechariah 11:5. It says, who possessors slay them, and Jake is still slayed in many different ways, and hold themselves not guilty. They say it wasn't me. That's their first rebuttal. It wasn't me. I didn't own slaves. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And they say in Salakia, and they that sell them say, blessed be the Lord Yahweh. This was with the slaves. I mean, slave traders and these plantation owners and etc. They was calling themselves Christians because who did all this rape, rob, land stealing? They called themselves Christians in a new redefinition of what the word Christian is, because the true Christians is the Israelites, but they redefined what the word means and gave you this new speak. For I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. So our own people, the owl sharpens the jet, they sold out, man. They finished. And let's go here. Because they like to say this guy was a Christian. But what that mean? He was into the white Jesus, which is an idol. It says a so-called white Jesus is a socially constructed image of, as they say, Jesus as a so-called white person that emerged centuries after his life and became a powerful tool for white supremacy, so-called colonialism, and the justification of slavery and oppression, particularly in the Americas. This depiction, which lacks historical or biblical basis, was popularized in Europe, so-called white people, distorts historical, as they say Jesus, true name Yahweh, is distorts his image, his personality, everything in the Most High. So let's go here. Let's go pull this Psalm 73:8. It says they are corrupt. And this guy here, Candace on, she's a fucking, I think she's an Edomite. She could be a Jake, but just all fucked up in the head, They are corrupt and they speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily, like speaking from a high stance. Let's go here. But this is the typical nature of Esau Edom. Obadiah 1:3. The pride of thine heart. Who's the most proudest people on the face of this earth? I'm talking about pride in a bad way too. Esau Edom, so-called white man, has deceived thee, that thou dwellest in the clefts of the rock. So that's where you devil's habitation is originally from. Mount Seir, in the clefts of the rocks. Original caveman, whose habitation is high, and said in his heart, which means his mind, who shall bring me down to the ground? You got this, just look at the that guy, Donald Trump, can't think of his title, but he talked real lofty. You know what I'm saying? Let's go here. I think I want to go to this term here. Historical amnesia refers to the collective forgetting or ignorance of significant historical events by a society or a group, leading to a loss of lesson, shared identity, and the potential to repeat the past mistakes. And this is when they don't want to talk about the history, or they act like they don't know it, or they act like it's just a burden. No. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be dealt with one way or the other, but you see what it is. This is in the mind of the Edomites. Yeah, the Edomites, so-called white people. They relabel themselves all these different names to hide their identity, and a lot of them so dumb they don't even know, they don't know who they is. So your typical so-called white person, they just under that social construct white. Like Jake is under the social construct black and all this other madness. But the true fact, waking up, we up. Hopefully, this lesson has been edifying. Call Allah Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim Rachak Kodesh. Shalom.